find out if this works. So next doesn't next. Next does next. What we're going to be doing this morning is going to be leading you through a bit of a backgrounder on XBRL International, its history, the folks that are working together to further its mission, and where you'll find participants in adoption around the world. I'm going to start you off, and then my colleagues will take you through the terminology of XBRL. What are the words and the phrases that you're going to be hearing over the next couple of days? And in particular, talk about the XBRL specifications and best practice documents. And we're going to give you a little bit of a background here to help you in the sessions that will be presented over the next couple of days. And as you have an opportunity to take part in XBRL Spain, XBRL International, Euro filings, XBRL in Europe, some ways that you can contribute and you can get more out of what's going on. A brief backgrounder on who I am. I am one of the original nuts from which this tree has grown. I'll be giving you a little bit of a backgrounder, but my name's Eric Cohen. I work for PwC out of the United States, and I'm one of the original founders of XBRL. The things that I'm about to share do not necessarily reflect the opinions of XBRL International, XBRL Spain, XBRL in Europe, my firm. Many of the opinions aren't even mine because I have no personal attention span, and the words just come out anyway. They say that you must begin every presentation with an icebreaker, and so this is my icebreaker. That is the St. Eric, found in Stockholm, Sweden. Anyone here from Sweden today? A wonderful story. This ship, has anyone been to Stockholm? Have you been to Stockholm? A couple of people here. Have you been to the museum where this ship is in front of the Vasa Museum? Are you familiar with the Vasa? So in the 1600s in Sweden, the king decided that they would have the fiercest sailing ship because the country that had the ship with the most cannons, the most armory, would rule the world. And so the king said, let's build the greatest ship. And so the construction of the Vasa began. The wood that they used to construct the ship became so rare that if you used the wood for any other purpose, you were put to death. The ship was built to be this great and wonderful ship, very tall and powerful. And they brought the king and they said, what do you think, king? We're almost done. And he said, it looks great, but I think it needs more cannons because people need to fear us. The engineer said, well, if you put cannons up at the top of the ship, that will make the ship less stable. And the king said, are you engineers? Yes. He said, what am I paying you for? Well, I want more cannons. So they said, yes, king. So the day came when the Vasa was going to be christened and sent off. All of Sweden came to the shore in Stockholm there, and they christened the ship, and the Vasa began to make its way out so that they could rule the waters. A brief gust of wind caught one of the sails, immediately capsizing the ship and sending it straight down 200 meters from shore, where it stayed for many hundreds of years. The cold and brackish waters of the water there perfectly preserved the ship. In fact, the ship has suffered more degradation inside of the atmosphere-controlled museum than it had underwater. We are hoping that XBRL and your efforts are not like the Vasa, a wonderfully engineered thing that can do so much, and yet with the first gust of wind, it tips over and goes down. Instead, we hope it will be something very practical and meaningful to you and your audience. So let's begin with the basic idea of XBRL International. A vision that I say is that someday a piece of business information, once it's entered into any computer anywhere, will never need to be retyped. Has anyone ever looked at a computer screen or a computer report and had to type that information into another computer? Has anyone ever had to do that? Is anyone going to raise your hand this morning if I ask you a question? All right, wonderful. So the goal, a piece of business information once entered into any computer anywhere never needs to be retyped, enabling the business reporting supply chain. Take you through a brief history of our language from the first XFRML to XBRL as we know it today, a little bit about organization. The business reporting supply chain, I apologize, the colors did not meet the leap from my machine to his machine. What is the business reporting supply chain? This is the picture that we had when we began this effort, that the various parties that exchange information to make this vision, a piece of business information was sent to any computer anywhere, never needing to be retyped. So as information first went into a business from trading partners, or information started with a business trigger from the companies involved, as it was then used for internal business reporting, management reporting, internal reporting, preparation for external reporting, as it was then prepared and shared with others on the outside for investment, lending, regulatory purposes, reused once again for economic policy making and other purposes. Those participants involved being the companies whose information is being reported, or other organizations, governments, not-for-profits, anyone that needs to exchange their information with others. As that information is exchanged with financial publishers, data aggregators, investors, banks, as the various parties that touch the information, create the information, instigate the information, evaluate the information, assure the information, oversee the information, each one that has to touch it in some way, and the software vendors and service providers that are involved in making this a reality. This is what we call the business reporting supply chain. This is what we hope to integrate. This is what we with XBRL hope to bring value to each party that was involved. The worlds of XBRL are many. The place that people best know it is from documents with names like financial reporting taxonomies architecture, FIRTA, and they think of XBRL for financial reporting in most arenas. That's the one that certainly gets the most press in the United States, where I'm from. The Security and Exchange Commission and all the financial statements of everyone filing in US GAAP now mandated in XBRL. 8,000 plus companies, 40,000 filings to date since 2009. So financial statements is certainly the broadest focus, but it is for far more. It's for business reporting information. As we'll see, it's for sustainability, corporate responsibility, taxation, statistics, any type of information related to reporting for businesses. There's another part of XBRL. We won't be speaking about it much today, but it's the part that I introduced to the world of XBRL. It's the world called XBRL's Global Ledger Taxonomy Framework. It is the single, global, holistic, generic way to represent the underlying detail inside of ERP systems. If we truly want to capture information from the first point of entry through the end report, we need a holistic way of doing that. XBRL GL is that way of bridging from the world of transactions to the world of external reporting. So how did this begin? If we go back to when XML, the Extensible Markup Language, was first proposed by the World Wide Web Consortium. A gentleman named Charlie Hoffman out of Tacoma, Washington, a CPA, was doing a project with an accounting product called Great Plains Accounting Software. His client had a need, and Charlie heard about this new thing called XML, a recommendation from the W3C, February 2008, and he said, maybe this will solve that problem. Indeed, Charlie was able to use XML to solve that company's problem. He said, I'm looking at this now, I'm seeing that we have these things called angle brackets with words inside, and I'm thinking that someday this is going to impact the world of financial statements. And if the CPAs, the Certified Public Accountants, the Chartered Accountants of the world, aren't the people who are developing the names inside of those angle brackets, then the accounting profession will be left out in the dust. Charlie went to Great Plains Accounting Software and said, this is going to revolutionize the world. You need to give me somebody that I can work with so that we can move this forward. And they introduced him to a fellow named Wayne Harding. Wayne was their vice president of electronic commerce. He was also, fortunately, the chairman of the American Institute of CPAs, the AICPA High Technology Task Force. He was also someone who could have a very broad vision, a different vision. And Charlie and Wayne began to move this through the High Technology Task Force of the AICPA. Now, Wayne and I go way back. I wrote the first book about the Internet for accountants. I wrote the first article for the Journal of Accountancy in the United States. And Wayne came to me and said, Eric, I'm working with this crazy guy named Charlie Hoffman, and I think that this has the opportunity to revolutionize accounting as we know it. Wayne knew me because I'd been involved in standardization of accounting software for a very long time at the detailed level. And so Charlie and Wayne and I went to the AICPA, developed the case, and began to move this forward. By the way, if you're interested in a more detailed telling of the history of XBRL, there's a document at the AICPA's website called The Story of Our New Language. These slides will be new available, and you can get a very detailed background on the history of XBRL. So with this beginning, a group came together in August of 2009 and said, should we do this or not? And in October 2009, at the AICPA's offices, pictured here are some people that you may know. Louis Mathern, now overseeing XBRL at the Financial Accounting Standards Board, the accounting regulator standard setter in the U.S. Mike Willis from PwC, who's been the chair of XBRL numerous times. Charlie Hoffman, the gentleman where they started. Karen Waller, who with Louis helped lead this at the AICPA. The work began in October 2009. October 1999. Thank you. October 1999. It would have said that here. The first official meeting then in October of 1999, a bunch of people came together. Thank you. Usually I'm the other way around, but we got it that time. 1999. At the first official meeting, the group came together. At the time, it was called the XML-based Financial Reporting Markup Language Group. Focused on financial reporting. It was not extensible. It just, we're going to use XML. We're going to represent financial statements, financial reports with this markup language XML. And at the time, there was a decision to have this not at the financial reporting level, but on an international basis to have it at a detailed level, trial, balance, and below, because there would be more commonality. That is the place of XBRL GL, the detailed information found in ERP systems, but again, that's not where the greatest effort were. Then a couple of times a month for the next 6 months, starting in October of 1999 and moving to April of 2000, groups of people came together. Some of the faces you see up here are the people who helped lead this. People like Walter Hampshire and David Von Kamen, the authors of the first and succeeding specifications. Walter currently with the SEC leading up the technology of that mandate there. Lee Watson, who's been serving with XBRL International with a company called Web Filing. Zach Coffin, who was with KPMG, helping do the greatest share of traveling around the world to help people know about it. Elmer, Mark Schnitzer, and many others who made this happen. We met in Chicago, Seattle, Denver, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C., we were kicked out of our meeting room by then President Bill Clinton, which was a very interesting thing. Tampa, Florida, where XBRL received its name to try and accomplish something exceptional. An amazing thing, CPA firms, government types and others all sharing information. So this group brought together their minds, their visions to form what we now know today as XBRL, moving from something that was just financial statements based on XML to something that was extensible, where people could start off with something core like the IFRS taxonomy and then be able to add on to it, make it very special for their area. Business reporting, this much bigger picture, not just financial statements, not just taking a document and making it a better document, but improving all the processes of business reporting. And a language, something so that we can all benefit and communicate. A specification working group was developed to say, how can we use XML to make this possible? And one of the biggest pictures were, do we want to take today's reports and standardize the printed report, or do we want to create something new, something that was optimized for machine-to-machine sharing? We already have reports that we can read, but we don't have reports where machines can easily share the information with other machines in an extensible fashion. So the decision was made. We were going to focus on exchange between software applications. We were going to focus on exporting information from databases, bringing them into other areas, being able to compare. Something that was considered so hard that it would actually require lots of people to come together was considered the future. the area of displaying things on the screen, creating what you see is what you get reports, or being able to view raw report data was considered something that was past-oriented that people could do. Now, over the last 10 plus years, we found that there were still some issues where very practically we needed to have these. We have a rendering working group that Herm, who you saw, is helping lead. We've got something called inline XBRL that helps bring this back to displaying reports on the screen. We'll talk about those things some more. But the whole goal was machine-to-machine exchange. In April of 2000, the first XBRL specification and the first taxonomy, the US GAAP taxonomy, were shown in New York. Approximately 30 companies were represented, and this is a picture of some of those folks there. It was released then in June. So from those initial efforts, largely in the United States, the international reach began. The smiling gentleman with the glasses is Bill Swirsky. XBRL moved into Canada. Next to him, David Prather, and he at the time was working with the IASCF, the International Accounting Standards Committee Foundation, now known as the IFRS Foundation. And they began working on the IFRS taxonomies to get ready for a conference in London at the first XBRL International Conference. We've had 24 international conferences thus far, beginning with that London meeting. Our next one is in November in Yokohama. It'll be at the top of the tallest building in Tokyo, in Yokohama, the top couple of floors there. So it's going to be an absolutely incredible time. Hope to see some of you guys there. But the group comes together on a regular basis to continue to move forward its development in working groups that meet as part of XBRL International, and of course in the jurisdictions that have been formed. You saw presentations from XBRL Spain from the main room. You saw Gilles and others from XBRL in Europe. And so at this point we now have dozens of jurisdictions that take the work of XBRL International and make it happen locally. Encourage the development and use of the specification of specific taxonomies. So the IFRS Foundation being one of those jurisdictions, and then Spain, many other countries around the world that have picked up this banner of XBRL. It doesn't mean these are the only places where XBRL is happening, but it does mean that they found independent people, that they're bringing together various representatives of the business reporting supply chain to help move it forward. And so XBRL continued to take off and get ready for the future. That was one of our conferences in Eindhoven. We had a conference inside of a flying saucer. That was a lot of fun. So these are some of our milestones from the time that Charlie, Wayne, and I first got this to the AICPA, to the beginning of the conferences. We have the various specifications that we'll talk about. Specification 1.0 coming out June 2000, 2.0 coming out. The 2.1 specification coming out December 03. Slide is slightly off. I apologize for that. The consortium developed working groups. It developed the standards board. It developed the best practice board. The membership grew. We developed taxonomies. The software developers came out with all sorts of tooling. Major projects from the APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority or Administration in Australia, being the first major user of XBRL, to users around the world, here in Spain, in Israel, in Chile, the United States, where there are mandates, where there's optional use of XBRL. I believe that over in the other room later, they'll be talking about something called Standard Business Reporting, SBR. And this is where XBRL and other standards are used so that it's not just one regulator, but many regulators come together to try and reduce the compliance burden and make it easier for those regulators to talk to each other. So one language throughout an entire country. The introduction of CEOs, the introduction of some new staff. But I'd say most important to me is the faces of XBRL. I don't know how many of you know Enrique. He was been working with him at the University of Huelva. He has been a lot of the spark here in Spain for many years. The Bank of Spain, of course, picking up and moving it forward. But just many faces, people that have been involved from around the world, working together. Many of these faces you will see here. There's Gilles, who you saw, Olivier from the IFRS Foundation, Herm that you were introduced to. Lots and lots of people here and around the world working together to make this a reality. XBRL's leadership, I mentioned Louis Mathern from the AICPA was the first chair and helped XBRL get started. Mike Willis, Walter Hampshire, Kurt Ramin, Michael Ojeda, chairs of the International Steering Committee, Arlene Thomas, now the chair of the board. These are the leaders of XBRL. XBRL international staff, and one picture I don't have here is Asha Bhatnagar, the new director of technical standards. You'll be seeing him as well. But Tony Fragnito was supposed to be here. He's the CEO. Cheryl Neal helped leading things up. Dave Nitchman, marketing. Angela Rose, Lee Watson also helping, coming from web filings. Working groups. These are the people who are getting the standards out there. These are the people who are getting the best practices out there. If you are a member of XBRL Spain or XBRL in your country, these are groups that you can at least sign up for the mailing lists, keep in touch with what's going on, and perhaps take part in. The base specification and maintenance group, taking care of the XBRL specification, will speak to that. That is the basic foundational rule and guide for XBRL, setting out the syntax and semantics, the grammar and meaning of XBRL taxonomies and instances. And we'll go into what those words mean. So the group that sees that moving forward, I've mentioned the XBRL Global Ledger Taxonomy Framework, the taxonomy for the underlying detail inside of ERP systems that then hooks to the end reporting, the XBRL GL Working Group. Formula, the ability to have basic rules and tests. So if you think about a spreadsheet and say take something from some different places and put them here, or do some tests on some other things and give me the results. You'll be hearing more in the latter half of our newcomer session with more information on this. Rendering. As we said, XBRL was not supposed to be about making things easy to see outside of applications, but we have a group that is trying to deal with some very practical issues there. Versioning, as we change taxonomies, as we update them, even perhaps as we have our data and we come up with different versions of the data, how do we track and communicate that? Taxonomy architecture, how can we make it so that as people develop their taxonomies, the things that many people here are involved in developing, how do we make it so that there's more commonality, more sharing? The Abstract Modeling Task Force, if you catch Herm, he will love to tell you about how we're taking all the work of XBRL and trying to make it even more transparent and clear. On the best practices side, project listings, being able to go to the XBRL International website at xbrl.org and find out about all the projects about XBRL around the world. Taxonomy architecture working groups, the taxonomy recognition working group trying to help give greater transparency to taxonomies as they're developed. If you are involved in audits, there's an assurance committee working on how can auditors, CPAs, and CAs provide comfort on XBRL filings. There's an international conference committee trying to get ready for Tokyo and then Dublin and then whatever comes next. Membership development and others. And if any of these are interesting to you, we can help you get involved in those. But you've heard me mention a couple of terms a couple of times now. They are sort of the basic foundational things of XBRL. So let's get started in that. Again, I'm going to start you off, and then after the break, we're going to get more deeply into it. So let's begin with why do we need some sort of a standardized syntax? And I know we got a webcast, and anyone who's watching this can't respond back, but this is going to be called some audience participation. I need you to put on your thinking caps for me. There's some written instructions that have been given. So we have a group of bankers who've been sitting in a room, and this group is from the United States, Canada, Australia, Sweden, and Fiji. They've been given a set of written instructions. Give this of that currency to a person to write on that date. What are some of the challenges that the people in this room have to face? All right, dollars. Is it U.S. dollars, Canadian dollars, Australian dollars, Fijian dollars? But it's not Swedish dollars because they use coin. Now, right now, they're all about par, which is, they weren't at this time, but that's an issue. Okay, dollars. Whose dollars? What's another issue? Okay, we're looking at 08-11-09, and I'm guessing that we have at least two different interpretations of what that date is. I look at that date and I say that's August 11th, 2009. Who's with me on that? All right, we got a couple people here. Some people may read that and say that's November 8th, 2009. Do we have any takers on that? There might even be some people say that that's November 9th, 2008, because the Swedes like to put the year first, and that's also the ISO 8601 format. So if we can't agree on the dates, is that a minor problem? What's another issue we have? How about that? Right there. For the folks on the webcast, I've got my little red thing on the comma between the 5 and the 3 zeros. To someone from the United States, well, how many people believe that number is more than 1,000? How many people believe that number is less than 1,000? Okay, so we've got some disagreement. So we've got this little thing here, and sometimes the comma is a decimal point. Sometimes the comma is a thousand separator. That makes it difficult to exchange things. So we've got a difference in whether that's 5 or 5,005 with a precision of 3. Or 5,000. We've got problems with the dates. We've got problems with the dollars. Any other challenges? There's one that's not, it's a little more subtle. Do I look to the person who's on my right today and then give them the money on that date? Or do I have to wait till that date, see who's to my right, and then give them the money? Okay, now there's one more thing that I have here, and I have the letter CSV. Does anyone know what a CSV file is? Comma separated value file. And why is it called a comma separated value file? Because if you look at the text file, you're going to see maybe I've got a spreadsheet that's got some numbers, it's got some words, and separating each cell, there's something that separates it. And in the United States, the thing that separates it is the comma, one of those things. But we've already said that in continental Europe, a lot of places the comma is not just a display device, it is a decimal point. And if commas separate a single number, it is not good to call that thing two different facts. And that's why in a lot of continental Europe, the comma separated value file is actually a semicolon separated value. So we can't exchange the most standard format that is used for exchange for products like Excel. So if we can't exchange numbers, if we can't exchange dates, if we can't even exchange files, does that make it difficult to exchange business information? I'm going to say yes. So along comes something called XML. XML says, let's get rid of the different way that we present things, come up with one agreement, and then we can present it however we want. So XML takes care of dates by saying, let's use a format called ISO 8601. Let's take care of numbers by not using any thousand separator and using the period as the decimal point. And by the way, we just had a wonderful conference in the United Arab Emirates. And they've got one other issue. Now, most of us in the room recognize these things here, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, depending on where you come from. But they all look like that. Okay? In the United Arab Emirates, they look like that. You get in the taxi, they say, oh, McKay, Mr. Coleman, you owe us that. And I say, okay, that looks like a period, that's a 1, that's a backward 7, that's a bigger backward 7, that's a backward 3, 0, 7, Beethoven's 5th, bring it upside down the 9. XML gets rid of all these differences and says we're going to use one set of digits, one set of numbers, one set of dates, and then we'll let you present it however you want. So XML helps bridge international differences. XML has a lot of other things that it helps bridge. Now, there's a lot of other formats that people use for exchange. I'm on Monday having to go to argue why XML is better than HTML for data. The whole reason that XBRL came out is because there are tens and hundreds of thousands of financial reports in HTML, and yet they're completely different, and inconsistent. So yes, HTML lets you put in things at different lengths and doesn't have any limitations, and you can grow things all you want in this cross-platform, but HTML isn't good for standardized content and validation, and people don't say, let's come up with standard ways to represent things with HTML. Fixed length ASCII or tab delimited ASCII or CSV formats or Excel or DBase or EDI formats. So EDI is very common. UNCFACT has EDI standards in the United States, ANSI XBRL. They've been working on this for years. So we have groups that have been collaborating in that space. But EDI has had problems. In particular, once you pick the size of a field, 50 characters, you put in 51, you blow up the system. EDI wasn't designed for extensibility. EDI wasn't designed for rip and read, being able to see the context of the field names. EDI did not easily let you validate the content of your file. EDI was not generally a standard Office import and export. So some of the things that limited us in these different file formats for years, XML helps overcome with one minor thing. In the 10 design rules of XML from the W3C, they said, we know these files will be a little big. So XML brings agreement for format, unlike CSV, overcomes numerics and dates and other types of formats. Still some things it doesn't do. It doesn't bring us together on semantics all the way, because we can add information. So here is some information. We see someone's name, and then if you're familiar with this, it looks like someone's street address, a city, a state in the United States, a zip or postal code, a string of numbers that to someone in the United States is very recognizable as a phone number. A 1 being our country code 334. But again, this isn't the format of phone numbers around the world. If you go to the UK, you see the plus and the 44 and things in parentheses and smiley faces and exclamation points and all sorts of things like that. So depending on the context, a person can recognize this. But there's so many different types of formats that unless we can come together to begin to agree on how we can encase metadata, information about that information around that fact, metadata helps us to better describe the information. And if we agree on this metadata, even if we don't get it perfect, maybe some wonderful things can happen. We introduced the 8601 for the dates. Now, it doesn't mean that the data is right. We still have the old computer garbage in, garbage out, but it moves us forward. And so XBRL is the group that came together to say, let's agree on how to use XML for business reporting. Let's take care of the pervasive processes of moving information from that first transaction to the end report. Let's make it the equivalent of a barcode. Barcodes change the way that products went from manufacturer to retail. Let's change the way the business information can go from first transaction to end report. Let's make it as disclosure neutral as possible. It's not trying to change GAAP. It's trying to represent the different types of reporting and is being used for many such purposes around the world. It is not just about data. It is being used to standardize and communicate rules and formulas and controls and processes and resources, both internal and external. And there are companies and organizations and countries who are already realizing great processes here. So from that first transaction to end report, for companies, for governments, for not-for-profits, being a bridge, we're not trying to take the place. So we have representatives here at the conference from Accord, who have been working in the insurance space for a very long time, not trying to replace them in any way, but trying to complement them. Others, both very specific, the Mortgage Industry Standards Maintenance Organization, MISMO, and others that are more generic, such as ISO 2022 in the financial services space, or UBL in broad space. They want to be the way to represent the standardized business transactions. XBRL wants to be the way to generically represent them, bring them together throughout an ERP system, and then summarize them in all the different ways to have a seamless audit trail from beginning to end. And not just financial reporting, but standard business reporting, bank reporting, sustainability, GRI, carbon disclosure, all those efforts will be represented. You'll hear many of them on Friday at a special session. And in particular, there's a group that's meeting here during the week, GRC XML, representing people saying we need to standardize the collection of risks and controls and the test of controls and the underlying evidence and the policies that drive them and the links to things such as Solvency II, Pillar 2. So XBRL says let's add on to the power of XML, and we're going to go from describing information to defining it. We're going to, in a multi-language environment, for each of the things we come up with a tag, we're going to come up with descriptors, captions, labels, definitions, pointers to authoritative reference materials such as your country's rules or guidance. We're going to come up with interrelationships. We're going to come up with different ways things can be presented, but they are only loosely tied to those. They're not bound to those. We're going to standardize how things that can then do business information can express this information, the rules. So multidimensional business and financial information, flexible information with a lot of comfort around it, mathematical relationships and different ways to present that to the eventual consumer. Now, I've been mentioning XML, and so one of the questions that I get a lot is, XBRL has a lot of overhead. It sounds like there's a lot of things you're trying to do. You told me how great XML is. Why don't I just use simple XML? And I don't know if anyone has faced this situation. A little play that, just check my timing here. I will run through this narrative quickly. This is there's a great document from our best practices board available from the XBRL.org website that will go over this in a lot more detail. But here's one of the questions. People say, I'm having trouble deciding between XML and XBRL. And that's not really the decision to be made because XBRL is XML. And people say, well, what then am I choosing? My technical people say that I should be using simple XML and not complex XBRL. And really, there's a couple of different choices when it comes to XML, and that's just starting with XML and building things yourself, using XBRL or using one of the other frameworks for XBRL. And there's a number of excellent frameworks depending on the type of work you're doing. But people, they say, well, no, my programmers say that XML is easy and XBRL is hard. But most of the people who are making that argument don't understand that this is really a much more complex issue. XML is a standard, XML schema is a standard, but those are standards for building representational languages. XBRL is a dozen years of experience in taking XML and thinking about the things that you need for business reporting. As you've already seen, the ability to associate human-readable labels in many languages in a standardized fashion, human-readable definitions and pointers to authoritative materials, presentation guidance but not being bound to it, formulas, calculations, and other validation rules. There's a lot of building blocks that people can try and reassemble, they call it reinventing the wheel. But XBRL has already formalized how to do that with its 12 years of experience. Software developers on board, regulators on board, the accounting profession on board, analysts on board, academic community on board. XBRL uses the entire XML family, well, most of the XML family specifications. It is based on XML, XML namespaces, XML schema, XLink. It does not invent things on its own. But it says, how should we use those things for our purposes? Again, a lot of technical people say we should just build XML schemas. I've heard this again within the last 2 days. I hear it very often. What happens is people do that, have to recreate the wheel. One of the basic things in XML is elements versus attributes. It's something people have been arguing about since 1998. But to encourage reuse, consistency, comparability, dealing with that element attribute situation, standardizing on some things that XML and even XML schema doesn't standardize, making sure your applications will understand what you're working with, having great documentation for the specification and maintenance, knowing that there's a group of people that are out there to leverage it, dealing with things in a holistic way, leveraging the knowledge and experience of others. There are other standards which are great for their purposes. If you're dealing with exchanging invoices or purchase orders, you can use the right standard for that purpose. But for exchanging business information, that's our goal of XBRL. Okay, so next after XML, people say, well, why don't I just use a data warehouse? That way I can take information from everywhere, come up with one set of common definitions and put them in. In the United States, we have a product to get rid of cockroaches from people's kitchens. It's called the Roach Motel. They have an advertising campaign that, like a hotel, roaches can check into the hotel, but they can't check out. And with data warehouses, the information is much like that. The information can be put in, but then it loses its meaning if it's ever reused. And this isn't about point A to point B. This is about reuse of information. This is about information going out, being able to come right back. It's about reuse, and OLAP has its borders. It's a one-way trip. So lots of folks out there coming up with electronic ways of doing things. That is a great solution, whether it's EDI, whether it's another framework. So electronic data, great start. Standardizing them, coming up with an agreement. Let's use fixed length ASCII, let's use EDI, a great addition. Coming up with semantics, the fields and structure, even better. For business data, using XBRL, using it within the XBRL framework. If you're dealing with detailed data, we move even more. These are some of the layers that move us forward. All right, I'm going to start you on some of the terms of taxonomy and instance document. We're going to take a break in around 12 minutes, and when we get back from that break, Eric and Bartosz will take you further on this. So, taxonomies, instance documents, defined in the XBRL specification. The taxonomy is the place where people have come together to say, let's agree on the vocabulary of business reporting. What are the things that people want to report? How do we categorize them? How do we make it easy for people to find them? So taxonomies define the business reporting concepts to be reported. In the example of a financial statement here, we forget the numbers because that's a point in time, but it's the shared things, it's the codes that we're going to use in the future. Our vocabulary of agreed upon business concepts. For each business reporting fact, we're going to have attributes that help describe what it's supposed to be. So we have sales, and not only do we have sales, but we want to know that the sales is reported as a number, because my sales last year were Eric, and the year before that they were Bart. Doesn't make any sense. It has to be a number, so we say it's a number. But even more, we say it's a monetary number. So it needs to be associated with an ISO 4217 monetary code that the thing is in EUR euro or USD dollars or CAD Canadian dollars. So we have our sets of rules to make sure the data is as good as it can be. We use the XBRL specification and its modular extensions as the rules for how to create them. And then depending on your business environment, based on the standard taxonomy, you may let people extend it to add their own terms. In the U.S. SEC situation, companies can say, there's nothing in the list of 18,000 concepts that perfectly matches our concept. And so the X of XBRL is extensibility. Not necessarily true in every program, but some will let you add your own things. This is a little bit of a snippet about a taxonomy. Don't worry, there's no quiz on this next period. I can hardly read it. Our preparers and analysts don't have to view or read these things, especially in the native format, but it has everything that you need. It has stuff primarily for people, human readable labels so that they can read things and know what they are in all of the ISO language sets as you need to. The IFRS taxonomy can be read in English, can be read in Arabic, can be read, I think, in Dutch and Spanish and a number of other countries, and their goal is to have all the EU language sets available. The exact same data, the exact same codes, but with one flick of the switch, you can see it in a language more familiar to you. Human readable definitions, links to authoritative references to better understand what's going on. The IFRS taxonomy linking to the bound volume, the US GAAP taxonomy linking to the FASB's codification. Then there's a bunch of stuff more for the machines, because it is about that machine-to-machine exchange. A unique element name, the serial number that describes the concept, and the rules about the data types to make sure the data is appropriate, and instructions for how things add up or subtract, and instructions on whether something can be put in with no content, and how they relate to each other abstractly and in multi-dimensional fashions, and formulas and rules and whether things are normally debits or credits and whether things are at a point in time or a period of time. And these will go into some different files. They'll go into something called the scheme from XML schema. So the XSD, the XML schema, will go into a link base with names like the label link base, the reference link base, the presentation link base, the calculation link base, the definition link base. And we've got some link bases coming together for our formula specification. So people around the world have come together to be developing these taxonomies, starting off with that US GAAP one back in 2000, and then now being developed by the Financial Accounting Standards Board, coming out on an annual basis as accounting standard updates happen. The IFRS taxonomy coming out with the bound volume, Canadian GAAP and Japanese GAAP and German GAAP and all sorts of GAPs from around the world. Statutory filings. A lot of people here interested in banking. In 2005 in the United States, the U.S. banking regulators came together, the FDIC, FFIC, and others, came up with a common data repository. Instead of having to call up and deal with the filings, which there was a rule the filings had to be in on time, there was no rule they had to be correct. They called them call reports. They joked it was because when the report came in, they know they'd have to call them up because they knew the numbers would be wrong. They went from less than 1/3 of the reports being quality to over 95% being quality the first month they introduced XBRL. So the common data repository of the FDIC, the Euro filing work, the Solvency II work, and others in the statutory space. The mandate that went into effect last April in the UK with HMRC, tax filings being mandated in many countries and allowed in others. The standard business reporting, the SBR efforts of the Netherlands and Australia and others. The internal integration, sustainability with the global reporting initiatives G3 and G3.1 taxonomies, the Carbon Disclosure Project, the Wiki Project. All of these taxonomies bringing people together for global agreements on how to express information, whether it is from the FASB, from the Open Compliance and Ethics Group, the IFRS and the IFRS Foundation, HMRC, the GRI, the EBA, and others. The SBR efforts in Australia and the Netherlands. So we've got our schemas, we've got our link bases, label, reference, presentation, calculation, definition. That's our agreement. That's everybody gets to share that, and then we've got our business reports where we use those codes to provide the context for our facts from our financial statements, from our ERP systems, from our carbon disclosure, our G3 reports. Our instance documents have our business data constrained by the taxonomy, using the taxonomy terms to say, this is what I mean, and providing contextual information. What's the point in time? What's the appropriate unit of measure? Is this US dollars? Is this Canadian dollars? Is this euros? Is it Fijian dollars? Who is the organization? What's the period? You'll be hearing about this in far more detail after the break. All subject to technical and data validation so that information can be made more correct. If you're a regulator, it's right at your front door. Before you bring it in, they've had a chance to make sure that's correct. We're taking our business data, once again, going into a format that hopefully no human should have to read directly, but then machines consume it and you work with it. So both for the sake of time and because Eric and Bart will be speaking about this, what goes in an instance document later, I'm going to skip past this. The set of rules that guides all this is the XBRL specification and its modular extensions. And so we begin with the recommendations. These are the ones that XBRL International says you can be using today with full comfort. From the 2.1 spec that came out in 2003 with the promise that it would not change. They'd have to give people 2 years or more notice before they make any major changes to it. The XBRL 2.1 specification, setting up the syntax and semantics of taxonomies and instances. The dimensional specification, adding multidimensional, the formality of multidimensional reporting to the specification, developing the different things that you'd be putting into your instance documents and into your taxonomies to show if you need more than just one line item to provide context and the meaning to your facts. The formula specification, talking about those business rules, being able to create new things from others, being able to do tests. Inline XBRL, that way to merge the metadata necessary to treat XBRL with HTML documents. Transformation registries for special rules for the fact that inline is very regional, how to turn regional information to the standards involved in XML and XBRL. XBRL GL, another recommendation. These are the recommendations. These are things XBRL International says you can use with comfort and assurance today. Proposed recommendations, updates to the specifications, and some new additions. New types of labels that move beyond the basic capabilities of the label interface. New extensions to formula. The abstract model that's going to be used to make further development even easier and further understanding. And again, one of the big things is something called inline XBRL. I mentioned that when we began this a long time ago, we said we already know how to read documents, we already have HTML, we're trying to make it better from machine to machine. And people said, well, we still have that human component. Maybe it's for review, maybe it's for assurance, maybe it's we want something that people can read where just the XML is there so you have the best of both worlds. And with the HMRC's mandate last April, a number of countries and regulators have been looking at this thing called inline XBRL, where you start off with your HTML document and behind the scenes you introduce metadata. Are one of you guys going to be showing this in mine? Okay. So you'll be seeing some examples about this. XML was separating the content and the context so that you could have all the content and all the meaning, but none of the, you weren't fixed to one presentation. There are some situations where keeping the things together has some value. That's the project called Inline XBRL that you'll be hearing about after the break. But again, just to finish up my part here, what did I say this was all about? A piece of this information, once it enters any system, never needs to be retyped. Our goal here is that when you look at systems, here's a US-based accounting system. Here's one that maybe there's someone in the room that can read and I cannot. Here's another that there are probably people here who can correct the spelling. I don't know if this is Argentinian Spanish, Mexican Spanish. I understand some things that cut off the side. This is the first environment where I will not even attempt to pronounce these things because it will be so bad. But how do we bring these things together? How do we make it so that if you put on a pair of XBRL colored glasses and you look underneath, no matter what it says, no matter what the data says, you can look at it, but with one view underneath, you see the same thing. How do we make it so that business can move across languages, data definitions, file formats? How do we make it so that information can move from beginning to end? That's our world of XBRL. So we hope that you will become part of this, that you will take up part of this vision. You will add your vision for where this can go. How can we build the foundations together for revolutionizing business, governmental, not-for-profit reporting? How can we not just come up with the paved cowpath? Here's an old report, here's an electronic version of that old report, but how can we revolutionize data, processes, and the rules for everybody in the business reporting supply chain? How can we improve the seamless process of exchange across all processes internationally, from first transaction or business event through direct or derived use? Over the next couple of days, you'll be hearing more about some of the efforts that I've talked about. If you didn't have a chance to grab a copy of IBR magazine, this is the primary public mouthpiece of XBRL International. Some great stories here that talk about the Solvency II ORSA efforts, that talk about the GRC XML and others. It's available online. You can sign up for subscription. We'll be pointing you to the XBRL.org and the XBRL Spain websites. Encourage you to get into the public mailing list if you're not a member, and the internal mailing list if you are. There's wikis, there's other technical resources as well that we hope that by the time you're done here over the next couple of days, you'll have been able to take advantage of. There's some great sessions. There'll be an Ask the Experts session through the day tomorrow in the main area with people such as Herm and myself and the folks you see on this side of the room, ready to answer any questions about what we're talking about today or anything that we can to try and help you in your efforts. So I hope that you have a great conference. We're ready for a break at 10:30. According to our schedule, we come back here at 10:55, and then my able colleagues will be taking digging deeper into these topics.
So coffee break time.
The next presentation, there was some
No problem.
difference for them.
It's okay.
Update.
Okay.
Make this man work.
Copy mouse. What's that?
See, once you got the computer once, you're not supposed to have to do it.
Anche a me verrà. Podemos tomar
Un momento de relax.
Okay, can we start? So we had the first part of the training, so introduction to XBRL, made by Eric, and we have right now another Eric, Jerry, from France, and myself, Bartosz, and we'll do some more detailed presentation about the XBRL technical things. So the aim of this 1 hour session is to familiarize you with the XBRL terminology. So what is taxonomy, link base, resource, ARC-role, these kind of things that you may hear from IT people. And then present in general the overview of XBRL architecture. So what are the components, how does it all work, what is the scenario. These slides is a compilation of some my slides and Eric's slides, so I'll try to describe in my words what I think Eric meant, but if there is something what is wrong that I'm saying, that please Eric correct me.
Eric Leguzio.
Yeah.
Not Eric Lefrenier.
Yeah, I'm already said that there are two Erics. It's a very popular name.
And Will should be.
Yeah. So the application of XBRL, as Eric explained before, is mainly to define the business concepts and some technical standard and exchange the information. And that's the primary aim why XBRL was even invented. And you have to remember about it because people expect much more from it, and these things were added to XBRL later. But that was the initial plan why XBRL is was even invented. So you will see in the syntax later that there are certain decisions that were taken in terms of what syntax to use because of that aim primarily. And the new requirements that also Eric already explained is, first of all, advanced validation, so formula specification, and the link base that contains all the mathematical and logical rules to check the quality of data. So the dictionary part, that is the initial requirement, comes with the business rules, which increases the possibility of check the content of the data before submission and after submission. Then there was visualization and rendering. So again, something new. XBRL at the beginning was supposed to be just a mean of transport from one system to another. Right now, people want to see the data, especially accountants, before they sign anything. They want to see not angle brackets, but something nice and nicely formatted. So that's another thing that came. It's coming to XBRL. Then we have versioning, so communication of changes between dictionaries in space and time. So what is the difference between IFRS 2012 or 2011? Or what is the difference between CoreApp in France and CoreApp in Germany? These kind of things you can address in angled brackets that are defined in XBRL as well. And last but not least, the drill down of information. So how to get from the aggregated information that is in the report down to the underlying operations. And this is what Eric can tell you more about, because he's one of the inventor of that. It's XBRL GL. So if you have any questions about it, please address them to Eric. And now, other slide is how the XBRL in general is used, and this is based on the EIOPA example, because Eric right now develops the taxonomy for EIOPA. So EIOPA, as you know, is the insurance supervision, just like the EBA for banking, and they define the taxonomy. So a set of concepts that they require from the market in order to do the supervision. And they send this taxonomy to the supervisors, national supervisors, and these supervisors have to later distribute it to the insurance companies. And based on this taxonomy, insurance companies are able to figure out what is the thing that needs to be reported, and they send their reports every month or every quarter or whatever is the frequency to the supervisors. Oops. So this is in general how XBRL works. So we have taxonomy and instance document. In a moment we'll discuss what goes where and why. But first of all, what is the syntax behind it? So again, as Eric said, XBRL is XML. So you should be able to open XBRL document in any XML tool, and it shouldn't say that there is something wrong with that. We are using angle brackets. And these angle brackets are primarily defined in the XML specifications. And this is just a general syntax, so how to build the elements and attributes. But this is very, very generic and can be used for a number of purposes. There is XML application for the expression of the human DNA, or for mathematics, for equation, etc. So there are different applications of XML, one of which is XBRL. And XBRL is the primary purpose is to define the syntax and semantics for business reporting, which means that there is additional specification that is added to XML specification, which says about certain attributes and elements that are required from the business perspective. If any of you are from the accounting side, you know that accountants have this concept of balance of credit and debit nature. This is something that obviously is not in XML because it's general purpose, but for financial reporting may be necessary. That's why the existence of this attribute is defined in XBRL specification. And then based on the specification, people build taxonomies. And these taxonomies can be built by jurisdictions. So, for example, XBRL US, which is the American jurisdiction of XBRL, builds taxonomy for US GAAP. So for local accounting standards. IFRS Foundation builds taxonomy for the IFRSs, and so on. Also regulators build taxonomies because it's not only about accounting standards, but also other usage of and collection of data, which is in some other regulations, European regulations, for example. And also reporting entities, but this is another scenario that maybe will not go into details that much. In general, XBRL taxonomy defines business concepts, and then based on the taxonomy, you create instance documents. And instance documents must comply with the XML specification and XBRL specification, and also with all the rules defined in the taxonomy. These are the XBRL specifications that exist at the moment. You can see that the basic one, XBRL 2.1, is dated 2003, and since then, as we have new requirements for fulfilled in XBRL, you have modules to the specification. The first one was dimensions, and this is the specification that lets you define the disaggregations in a specific way so that the taxonomy content describes them differently to how the regular business terms are described. We'll talk about it later, how it's built. And then there is a number of other specifications which are being introduced. Generic link, which extends the extensibility of XBRL. The formula specification, which we talked about to describe the business rules. The registry of functions that is supporting that. The inline XBRL, which is embedding XBRL in HTML. And there are some more work being done right now. And there are also best practices documents. Some of them are for XBRL 2.1. Primarily, this is FERDA and TWIST. FERDA is being updated. It's financial reporting taxonomy architecture. So the best practices, how to build taxonomies. And there are also other documents for the best practices, but you have to remember that they always depend on the application scenario. So the best practices for extensible taxonomies like US GAAP may not necessarily be the best practices for the banking supervision because of this reporting scenario is very different. In banking supervision, you don't expect filers to extend the taxonomies. In the financial reporting, you do. So that's why these best practices may be different. And there is the Global Filing Manual, which is the nice source for best practices for Securities Exchange Commission report. Okay, let's look at this website of Intel. It's the 2010 annual report. As I told you, XBRL is two things. It's taxonomy and instance documents. Taxonomy, which defines something generic that is requested from the filers, and the reports, instance documents that contain facts. What on this website you think is generic and applies to all entities, no matter what is the name of the entity or period, etc. What generic financial term that you see here? That's a question, by the way. Let's speak just a little bit. What is the thing that you think that will go into the dictionary part? And what is the thing that is specific to Intel? Okay. So if you take, for example, IFRSs, you will see that IFRSs define net revenue as a business term. And they say that net revenue must be disclosed in the consolidated statement of income. And that's all that goes into the taxonomy. Taxonomy just say that there is a concept, it's somewhere in the hierarchy of other concepts, and you may report it. And every other thing that is in this report, which for example is a number, what is the precision or scale, what is the reporting entity, what is the period, which may also differ from entity to entity. These all are fact information that go into XBRL instance document. So there is clear division in XBRL between what goes into the taxonomy, just a general description, and what is in the instance document, all the properties for the general description for the particular entity, periods, units. It can be US dollars, but maybe other currency, the scale, etc. So that's the main distinction. And now, how does it refer, and what is the more detailed split? So we have the reports on the left-hand side. Reports contain facts, as I told you, and then we have taxonomy. And taxonomy XBRL is not a single block. I mean, technically, it can be a single file, but it's constructed of a number of components. The major two are the schema and link bases. In the moment, we'll tell you what goes where. Just to let you know at the beginning that schema contains the definition of concepts, while link basis contains relationships. So it is the place where you say how these concepts relate to each other. If you look at the US GAAP taxonomy, it contains what, 15,000 concepts?
18,000 on the way up.
18,000. And imagine you have a list of 18,000 business terms and you have to figure out what you need to report. It's undoable. You need relationships that tell you how these concepts relate to each other in order to figure out what really needs to be reported and how. So relationships are a very, very important thing. And what is the benefit of XBRL comparing to XML, for example, is that these relationships are defined totally separately from the concept's definitions, which means that you can flexibly rearrange them without changing the content of the schema file defining the concepts. And this is very, very important from the point of view of reporting, for example, according to the US GAAP or IFRS, where the content of the report is not a form, it's actually changes, it varies from the entity to entity. That's why this is a very important distinction, and it also helps in the banking supervision because a national supervisor can extend, modify slightly the requirements of EBA, which can be done, for example, also in the link base. So there's a number of link bases: presentation, label, definition, reference, calculation, dimensions, formula. Dimensions go into definition, and we will one by one try to explain what goes where and how it's built. So imagine you have this schema and the link bases. So in the schema, if you have what goes into the schema is, for example, information that there is a business term defined, and this business term is inventories. And this inventories is a monetary value because it's a numeric thing reported in a certain currency, and the accounting balance is debit. This goes into XBRL schema. Another thing that can go into XBRL schema is information that metadata that each group of inventories must be disclosed with their value according to LIFO or FIFO valuation method. So another thing that goes into the schema is how you can classify inventories in terms of their valuation. Then the next thing that also is defined in the schema is some breakdowns. For example, companies must disclose their operation split according to operating segments. So this is something that you define in the schema, that, for example, the list of segments. Similarly, in terms of domestic and foreign market, this distinction is also defined in the schema. And later you apply it for different concepts. We will show you how. So this is the schema part, and then the link bases, for example, contain information that inventories are translated into Polish as zapasy. So the human readable description of the business terms is in the link bases because you can extend it and flexibly shape it. Then the measurement method, so the reference describing how the inventories are measured, it's also in the link basis, where you can say that there are a number of references to the legal acts for a particular business term. Also, what is the relation and how the information is grouped. This is also in link basis. Inventories are reported in statement of financial position, in group of current assets, and in notes and disclosure of current assets. In two places, you have the same business term, and it's attached in the special places in the link basis. And also the calculation rules, and inventories are some raw materials, etc., or the dimensional breakdown. For example, inventories must be reported in the breakdown of the geographical areas as well as the operating segments. So this is the clear split, and now let's take a look how it goes into the syntax. So basically, in the schema, you can define three types of concepts depending on their further application. So when you're declaring a business term like inventories, you simply name it. You just say that there is a business term inventories, and these inventories can be reported with a certain value. But sometimes when you, for example, need to define information about the evaluation method, you define something which is called a tuple or tuple. I don't know which is the correct pronunciation. Both. Right. So a tuple is something that allows defining extendable lists in XBRL. So you don't necessarily have a single value, but you have a series of values, and you don't know how many, and the values are connected to each other. For example, when you have a table with the headers of columns such as group of inventories, valuation method, and value of the group of inventories, this table can be quite long. For sure, you don't know. So what you do, you only define the headers. And these headers are gathered in a single element, which is called a tuple. And then, the last but not least, you have the dimensional breakdown. So every enumeration of any breakdown must be also defined in the schema. You can define a breakdown which is open. I mean, you don't necessarily name all the components of this breakdown. You just say that there is a breakdown of certain kind. Please provide the proper value for your for this breakdown. In bank supervision, such breakdown could be, for example, obligor rate. Banks apply different obligor rates in different countries and different banks. So they just say obligor rate is integer. They don't say what are the numbers that you can use for that. So this is the split into item tuples and domain members and dimensions, and how an item definition looks like in code. So this is a statement of financial position. So if we pick inventories, in this schema you will find such code in angled brackets. So what is in here? First of all, you have to identify that this is item, so it's not a tuple. Second of all, you have to name it, and in XBRL, the naming convention is something that is being discussed at the moment. This is a technical name. It can be human readable, but doesn't have to. Then you have a data type. So what is the expected value? Monetary item type means that this is everyone who's reporting inventories must provide a number, and this number must refer to a currency, which is ISO 4217 code. Well, then, again, from the accounting perspective, you have to say if it's incident and duration. So if it's a stock or flow. Assets, liabilities are stock, but if you look at the income statement or a cash flow statement, you have flows. This is important because for assets, when you report them, you just say about one date, which is at the moment where this information was captured. While for the revenues, you have to say about 2 dates, because in one report, you can have yearly and quarterly data, and you have to be able to distinguish between them. Obviously, when you define, for example, profit loss, you don't define it as I showed on the first screen. You don't define it for a particular entity and period. You just say about the generic concept. So all the contextual information, which is periods or reporting entity, goes into the report instance document. Then you have the balance attribute, where you say about whether something is credit or debit. So in general, the application of this attribute is to make it easier for filers to figure out what is the sign of the element in the instance document. So if costs are debit, which is their natural accounting side, it means that they are reported as a positive number. While if costs are credit, which is their not natural sign, it means that they should be reported with a negative number. So that this is the information so that all filers report it in the same way. If half of the filers report cost with minus and half with plus, and then you aggregate it, you can have 0, which is not true. So this is just another indication for the rules how to report information. And then abstract attribute, it's XML attribute that makes it possible to define elements that are not going to be reported. You may ask yourself, why would you define elements that are not going to be reported?
Why would you define elements that aren't going to be reported?
Simply because I want to have some nice hierarchy defined in the link basis. So I want to present the taxonomy content in a way that accountants and people using it are familiar. So obviously, accountants are very used to having total at the bottom. But in fact, I have to have some header so that I have the children and the total at the bottom. And this header is an abstract. I don't report, for example, statement of financial position element because it doesn't make sense. But I have assets and total assets, which are two different elements, one being abstract and one being a reportable concept. Well, then, if you look at the tuple, which I told you about, you have inventory valuation with the 3 elements, group of inventories, valuation method, and value of the group. And then you can report different inventories with different valuation methods and their value. And in order to define such construct, what you define is a complex construct to represent a compound fact. And first of all, you have to define the items, so the elements that can carry a value, but later you define an element that refers to these elements and creates a structure. So in this case, you can see that inventory valuation, the substitution group is tuple, not item, and is a complex type with complex content, which has a sequence, which means the elements must appear in the same order, and the elements are group of inventories, valuation method, and value of group of inventories. And then you have min occurs and max occurs attribute to occur how many times, if any time, element inside of a tuple must appear. So this is an XML construct used in XBRL to provide information about a group of elements that must be understood together to make sense. If someone reports only FIFO and 1, 2, 3, you don't know what it is. You have to have these elements gathered together to have a compound fact to understand this thing. And then the last thing which I would like to introduce is dimensions. So if you have inventories that must be broken down by the areas, which is domestic, foreign, and total, and segments, you have to define also elements to represent these breakdowns. Again, you do it in XBRL by defining new elements in specific substitution group. So for the geographical areas, which is a dimension element, use dimension item substitution group. Also for the operating segments, but you can see that there is a difference between these two. The difference is that the elements that go into geographical areas are explicitly defined in the taxonomy, and this is why we call this explicit dimension, while the elements that are the content of the operating segments is not explicitly defined. It's open. That's why we call it a type dimension. So this dimension has a certain type, and this type is expressed by the segment name. In this case, it's a string, which means any set of characters and text, but it could be integer or any other constraint. So you can define closed dimensions when all members are known, or open dimensions when the members are unknown and every filer provides their particular information in this place. So explicit dimension, explicit members, implicit dimension or type dimension, and value of implicit domain. And then you need something which is a hypercube at the end that you use in link basis. And hypercube is used to link the financial terms with the breakdowns. Remember that the schema just defines a list of concepts. So it says assets, liabilities, Europe, oil, etc. List them one by one. And then in the link basis you say, okay, but are assets reported in the geographical areas or by products? How does it work? This is what you need the hypercube for. It's a link between the primary items, as we call the financial terms, and the dimensions, which is the breakdowns. So in this case, a hypercube has a certain substitution group, and it's possible to define the combinations where you have more than one dimension applying to a financial term. In some cases, in Core and FinRep, we have up to 8 or 9 dimensions bind together. Obviously, there is no way you can show it in bi-dimensional view on paper, but this is how the data is effectively modeled. When you have the dimensions, it's much easier to manage the data, etc. So in this case, we have a division of inventories into 3 different dimensions. This one, I don't know, but it can be whatever. We have the geographical areas, operating segments, and then we have this hypercube, which produces the Cartesian product of all members of all the dimensions that are inside of this hypercube. Moreover, XBRL gives you something which is not really known in the OLAP world, which is defining exclusions. So you can say, well, in general, inventories are broken down by Europe, by different geographical areas and operating segments, but there is no oil in Europe, so we can exclude this information so that it's not reportable. There is no way to find it. This is also, there are 2 reasons of using dimensions in XBRL. One is to express the model, so to tell what is logical, what is not. And second is to validate the instance document, so to check the content if it's according to the taxonomy. Now, what is everything that I was talking about right now goes into the schema. And we'll right now move to the link basis, so where we have the relationships. So in the schema, as I said, we have a list of concepts. Sometimes we have a tuple, so we have a nested concept, but that's all. And then in the link basis, what we do, first of all, we can assign the concepts with some resources, which in case of XBRL 2.1 are labels and references. So for every element that we define here, this is, for example, assets, which is monetary, instant, and debit. We can say that, okay, but assets in English, it's assets in Polish is activa. We can also say that assets are, the measurement of assets are defined in the IFRS 1 something something. This all are additional documentation that can be assigned to every single concept in order to give the semantics of it, represent the meaning. The second kind of link basis is where you link the concepts between one another. So you can say, okay, I have assets which are divided into current, non-current. Non-current are divided into non-current are divided into PPE and long-term investments, and so on and so on. So you link the information in some kind of hierarchy. And you have the third kind of link base, which is possible due to generic link, where you actually link resources to resources, and these resources can refer to elements in the other link bases and the schema file. So I will not go into details into that, but this is a very flexible thing that makes it possible to any kind of relationships in XBRL. Here is an example of the relation, so that you know something from the code side. We have two elements, assets and current assets, and this is defined where? Is it in link bases?
We have a wonderful gift for anyone who answers this question. A USB thumb drive for anyone who will.
So where is it? I give you three options. This code, will you find this code in the instance document, link base, or schema? Who said so? I think. So we have this in schema, and now we have to say what goes into link bases. So in link bases we have relations. Relation means we link two things together. In this case we have relation that links to locators. A locator that points to a schema file and to the assets element and have a local label. Another locator that links to the current assets. And then we have arc, which is the thing that connects these two locators. So this is how Xlink and Xpointer look in general. It looks like a lot of code, and it is, but it's very, very flexible at the end because you can override, prohibit, and do a lot of things with this relationship. So it's on purpose that much code in there.
This is the X of XBRL?
Yes, exactly. So, what's the Xlink and Xpointer in here? These are two XML technologies together with XPath, XQuery, and all the X's. These two in particular, they allow to find these href thing. So it's hyperlinks in XML documents. So you can point to something and then maybe name it, and point to something else, name it, and then link these two things. And this is exactly what we do here in XBRL. So we have locators pointing to a file, to ID of the element, in this case assets. We locally name it assets locator. We do the same for the current assets. And then we have the arc with a certain arc role, which is another very important thing. We can add different semantics to the relationships. We can say that, okay, what is the relation between assets and current assets? Is it a hierarchical relationship, or one is the detailing concept, or is it any calculation involved? All that can go into the link bases. And this arc points to the locators, have the arc which specifies the relationship, and then in general that's all. And obviously you have a number of arcles and arcs and locators in one link base because you have a hierarchy, not a single relationship. And what you can also do is not to link to elements, but you can link elements to a resource. And this resource could be, for example, a label or a reference. In this case, we have a locator for current assets, and we have a resource which is labeled. And this label says that there is something which is called current assets. So this current assets, which is a human-readable description of the element, we link with an arc to the locator of the element defined in the schema, and therefore we give it a name. Obviously, these resources can also have different roles because they can be short and long labels for the same element, or maybe labels with a specific application, the total label, or the beginning period, or any label. All that can be expressed in the link bases as well. The link bases, there are 6 kinds of link bases in XBRL in general. 5 introduced by XBRL 2.1, and 1 added later, which is called generic link, which allows defining a number of other link bases if you want. But let's start with the first 5: presentation, calculation, definition, label, and reference, and then we'll shortly describe the generic. What is important is that the link basis contains relationships, and relationships are graphs, which means you have the nodes and the edges. And obviously you can have alternative classifications sometimes, and we'll show you in a moment one of them. That's why when you look at the any taxonomy, you will see that the link bases are split into something which is called extended links. Extended links are the sets of relationships. This is the screenshot from Yeti, an application that you can browse most of the taxonomies available publicly. And this is, if I'm not wrong, IFRS taxonomy. You can see that this is the calculation link base, so one type of link base, but it contains a number of sets of relationships. One of the purposes of that is to make it easy to browse the taxonomy content. if you have a long tree, it will be very, very hard to find something. And the second reason is that in many cases you have alternative classifications. For example, in the IFRSs, you have income statement by nature and by function. And by nature, you have gross profit, which is the revenue from sales minus operating costs. And in the function version, you have gross profit, which is profit loss on sales, minus cost of sales, minus cost of administration. If you put it in a single graph, you'll have double information. So you have to split it. Gross profit obviously is one business term, so you define it one in the schema. But then in the link basis, you can define, okay, but in one case it's broken down by revenues from sales and operating costs, in the other case it's broken down differently. So this is how you can define different sets of relationships. And we call it extended lingo. So now briefly about the link basis. So the label link basis is there because the element names, usually, that are defined in the schema file are for processing, not that much for users. Obviously they can have some human readable meaning, but usually we try to remove all the diacritic characters because of encoding, and also we remove spaces. So at the end, in many cases, if you look at the US GAAP taxonomy, you end up with element names being camel case concatenation, which means every single word is capitalized, and then we remove all the spaces. And some of them are quite long and not very readable because of that. In the EBA taxonomies, we don't use such a lot of things. We use some codes. For example, MI20. It doesn't mean anything. That's why what we need is a label, is a human readable description what this MI20 means. MI20 under wrong was assets. XBRL gives you a number of ways to define these labels, and they can be also used depending on the context. So we can have previous start, use, end labels in different languages, or labels can be of a different kind. For example, containing documentation, not only the single word or short description of the meaning of the concept. Then we have the reference link base. So every concept should have, that's the best practice, a reference to a legal act that says why it even exists. Otherwise, it's hard to figure out what was the author's intention of including this concept in the taxonomy. And these references, what is important, they usually do not contain the text of the legal act. Just point to a section, paragraph, point in the act where this concept is defined. Although in many cases, the text of regulation is also somewhere included to give more hints about what is the concept about. Now we have the presentation link base. Presentation link base, the aim of it is to present the content of the taxonomy to the filers so that they can read it in a way and they can browse the taxonomy content in an easy way. It contains hierarchical relationships, and also it identifies the reportable information, which is very important. A schema file can contain thousands of concepts, but maybe a presentation link base just a few. And then the presentation link base tells you really what is from the schema file really is reported, not all the elements inside. So just to show you, if we have a statement of financial position like this, and we want to build a presentation link base, we have to start with locators and arcs, because this is what X-link is. So we start with a locator that points to the elements statement of financial position. Then we have another locator for assets and an arc between the statement of financial position and assets. Then we have another 3 locators that we point with another 3 arcs linked to assets abstract, and so on and so on. So we built such a hierarchical representation, tree-by presentation in the link basis. Then there is the calculation link base. It only allows for very simple calculations, but it's very useful to document the taxonomy content as well. So what it does, I mean, it only makes it possible to define the relationship that one element is plus minus weight, another element plus minus weight, another element. So it's not very sophisticated, but for the beginning, for the overview of the taxonomy, it can be very useful. There are certain rules that apply that not make it possible to add or subtract certain balance attribute elements, or it's not possible to define the cross-period checks. I mean, it's possible to define the cross-period checks, but then the tools actually don't support evaluation of that. Anyway, there is a formula link base that we'll discuss later that is far more powerful to express any mathematical and logical relationship. So here is a part of the calculation link base of the example. So we have assets tuple, which is non-current assets plus current assets. So the only difference between the presentation link base and calculation link base, apart from the different arc wall and the link base itself, is that we have one more attribute, which is weight. And this attribute tells us how the sub-element contributes to the upper level element. So it's very, very simple. Then there's a definition ring base, and in the XBRL 2.1 specification, there were 4 types of semantic information that could be defined in this definition ring base. So it was general and special. Essence alias requires element and similar tuples. For general and special, we can have a general element that is detailed or specified in a certain context. Like we have a postcode, which is a global element, but in US they call it zip code. So it's a special representation of the postcode, and usually this special representation contains some restriction on the data type of the general element. Postcode, you cannot define a pattern, but for the zip code you have a specific pattern. So this is how you say that we use the zip code, but if someone else uses another element, like in Polish we have Pocztowy, which has also a pattern, then we know that they both come from the same parent. They're the same thing, but represent slightly different. Essence alias, it's where you define 2 elements that are basically the same or very similar. It helps, for example, comparing between different taxonomies. Requires element is something that you could define where you have want some elements reported if another element is reported. And similar tuples is because of some extensibility issue that maybe we'll not go into that much details at the moment. And this is also where all the dimensions go. So right now we'll try to introduce you to dimensions because EBA taxonomy and IOPA as well are dimensional. I mean, almost every taxonomy right now is dimensional, the financial reporting taxonomy, because this is the easy way to define it and manage it, and our world is dimensional. So first, a little bit of terminology. So we have some constructs and terms that you have to learn when we refer to dimensions. First of all, we have something which is called primer, item, or a measure. And this is basically a financial term. Let's say, let's simplify. Let's say it's a financial term. For example, assets, liabilities, revenue. This is a primer item. In fact, from the technical point of view, we need it because of the XBRL 2.1 specification and its extension with dimensions. There is something that must hold data type and period type description, and this is the primer item. If it also contains some semantics or not, this is a question, and that right now it's being considered by the EBA, but at the moment it also contains some semantics. So this is the primer item. Then we have a domain. A domain is a domain. It's a list of something, a homogeneous set of something. For example, list of financial instruments, countries, currencies. This is in general a domain. Then you have a domain member, which is each enumeration of the domain. For example, list of instruments, financial instruments are equity instruments, debt securities, whatever, loans, etc., etc. Then in terms of sectors, you can have central banks, governments, credit institutions, and these are the members of domains. And then you have dimension. Dimension is a certain perspective that you can view the domain members. For example, when you have a list of instruments, you can have instruments held, or instruments issued, or maybe some other form. When you have, for example, a counterparty, you can have an issuer, or the counterparty that issued the instrument, or that was the intermediary in the exchange of the instrument. So different dimensions may refer to the same domain and reuse domain members. And then you have the hypercube that we already explained, that links primer items with dimensions and their members, and says what can or cannot be reported. That's why we have also a number of relationships introduced in the dimension specification and dimensional taxonomy that makes it possible to define these relationships. So you have a hierarchy of primary items that you link to a hypercube, that you link to dimensions, that you link to domain and their members. So basically this is how it looks. Maybe let's take a look at the example. So we have an example where we have information about profit and loss statement and all products or regions. Can you tell me what is the primary items? What are the primary items, financial terms in this table?
All products.
All products? Costs? What is the financial term? Is Poland a financial term? No, really. Boats? I don't think so. So the financial terms are revenues, cost of production, and profit loss. These are the primary items. How many breakdowns, how many domains do we have here?
By product, by region.
Yes. How many? 2. We have some sets of products and some sets of regions. And then we have also 2 dimensions because each domain must be associated with at least 1 dimension. So we have by product breakdown and by regions breakdown. And now we can see that from this table that we have the profit and loss statement that can be broken down by products and regions. And also for some strange reason, we don't have any revenues from selling boats and ships in Austria. That's why you can see that it's grayed out and excluded. So what do we need to do in XBRL? First of all, what we need to do in the schema, we define all the concepts. How many concepts in total do we have to define in schema? How many elements in order to represent this information? 50.
Oh,
50 or 150?
50.
Whoa, okay, yeah, could be.
If we did a line item on the approach, it would be around 50.
It's 3 times 16, it's 48 minus 2, it's going to be 46. Yeah, almost.
Plus the abstracts.
Yeah. Now,
Bring
we
it
could have a
up.
lot of abstracts over there. But let's assume we have dimensions. Let's assume we have dimensions, we have primary items and the breakdowns, then how many items do we need? First, definitely need an item for every primary item, business term. So we need a description of revenues with a label, and revenues are duration, credit, and they are monetary item type. Then we need an item for cost of production, when we also say duration, debit, and all the stuff, and profit loss.
And a nice abstract for to get
Yes,
listed.
and we also need an abstract to have some kind of nice header and presentation. Then we need to define the members of our domain. So every element over here will have representation in XBRL because it has to have a label, maybe a reference or something like this. So we have 4 members of products domain and 4 members of regions domain. Then we need 2 dimension items to contextualize this information. And then we need 1 hypercube to link this information together, and maybe another hypercube to define the exclusion. So in XBRL, first of all, what you start from, you define extended link, so a new set of relationship. When you say, okay, I have profit and loss statement, which is an abstract, and I have 3 sub-elements, revenue, cost of production, and profit loss. This takes care of the header of the columns. And then you say, okay, but I have some breakdowns. So I have a dimension item by products breakdown, which is all products, cars, boats, and ships. And I have geographical breakdown, all regions, Poland, Germany, and Austria. What I need to do to link the primary items with dimensions, what do I need in the middle? A hypercube. So hypercube, I link to the primary item and then to the dimensions. What is important in XBRL, you don't have to link this hypercube to every primary item. It's enough if you link it to the top level element, and all the children will inherit this information. So it's much easier and saves in code. And also what you can do, this is some target roles, some technical attributes, you can reuse the breakdowns. It means that once you define a breakdown somewhere, you can always refer to it. You don't have to repeat the breakdown every time you are using it. So once you define a list of 200-something countries, you can always point to that list from any table instead of defining it for each table separately. This also helps with maintenance because at the end, when there is a new country like South Sudan, or maybe in some time we'll have drachma, a new currency, then you can include it in one place and it's applicable in all the tables. And then you can also define the exclusion. So in the exclusion, you define a new hypercube that points to the same dimensions, but you only pick up the members that you want to exclude. In this case, I want to exclude Austria and for boats and ships. So this is the combination that I exclude. And I link this exclusion hypercube to the revenue. And the property of exclusion or inclusion is on the R. It's either all, which means this is a valid combination, or not all, which means this is excluded combination. There are a lot of nuances about that. There are closed and open hypercubes, but in general, this is how it works. And then there is the generic link, which we said that this is something that you can extend the XBRL even further. You can define new types of resources, new types of articles, link bases, and so on. It's a new syntax and new semantic that you can introduce to XBRL. And some representation of this new syntax is the formula link base, formula specification that defines how to create business rules, and the rendering, which is built right now, how to visualize a table in 2-dimensional view. So in terms of XBRL formula, just very briefly, because we don't have time for that, what you need to define a business rule is 2 things. One thing is to be able to query the instance document to pick up the things that you really want to compare. So on the instance side, you have the query part, which is done in XPath, XQuery, and XBRL functions. And then on the taxonomy side, you have to the definition of this rule. So what is exactly the thing? How does it relate to the content of the taxonomy? And in terms of the functionality of the formula, you have basically two major functions. One, formula itself, and actually this is the name of the specification, which makes it possible to create new things from what was reported. You have a formula to define new concepts, new facts, new indicators, and you have also assertion. Assertions are used to check the content of what was sent. You can have a value assertion, which checks the value of each element or between the elements. Consistency assertion, which is the same, but you can apply some margin of error and involves formula at some point for the creation. And you have existence assertion to check if something was reported or not, or how many times. Now this is basically, this makes it possible to check the content of the instance document in any way. And the instance document itself, so we finished with the taxonomy side. This is all that goes in the taxonomy, and now we go into the instance document. So what filers really send to you? So what they send to you, if you look at this table, is basically the values that refer to the concept. So concepts are defined in the taxonomy, values are assigned in the instance document, but the number 400 for no current assets doesn't mean much. What you need to do is you need to figure out what is the period, the reporting entity, currency, scale, and so on. All this information in XBRL is called contextual information. It's not the fact itself, but it's a context that can be reused many times. For example, in this case, you can define a context for the period 2010-2011, and it can be reused for a number of facts that refer to the same context because it's the same entity and so on. Here is an example of an instance document. You can see that it's an XBRL instance document because it starts and ends with XBRL tag. So it contains a context, as you can see over here, and it contains a number of facts. So this table over here, this representation in XBRL is this piece of code, where we have a number of elements that refer to the context, and we have their values. Facts, context definition, and also we have a unit definition. We'll talk about it in a moment, because obviously you can have in the single instance document values with different units, not only monetary units, but also units which is not really monetary, like number of employees. You express it in the just pure nothing really, or you can have percentages or anything like that. Or if you have an instance document for the energy exchange, you can have information about kilowatts of energy or anything like that. I mean, it's not really applicable only to financial terms. So what is the link between the taxonomy and instance document? In the taxonomy, in the schema, basically you have definition of an element. You know that code already. So we define the profit loss element, which is monetary. It's an item, which means it only contains a value, it's not a tuple. Its duration and its credit. And now in the instance document, in order to report this information, you need at least three things. First of all, you have to define who you are and what is the reporting period. Then, what is the currency? And last but not least, what is the value for this particular element? So the name of the element we reuse to locate it from the instance document. So we refer from the instance document to the names of the elements we find in the schema. Then, because this element is monetary item type, it means that the profit loss must refer to a unit. We have a unit reference, which is the ISO 4217 code. Again, because it's a monetary item, it means that the value of profit loss, so between the opening and closing tag you have some number, this value must be a number. If someone writes some other character than a number over there, it's going to be invalid. And last but not least, because this element is defined as duration, it must refer to the context, which has a period element indicating start and end date. If it was instant, only one date is necessary. And here are some more examples of ERICs of different contexts. So here you have an example of a context that is just instant. So you can see that it contains only one day. Here we have duration context with 2 dates, and here you have context which is forever. And maybe Eric can explain forever. Because during one of our trainings, Eric, fine. Could you?
Oh, sure. When you think about an income statement, balance sheet, we know that those are facts that change over time. The balance sheet is your cash as of a certain period of time, your inventories as of a certain period of time. When you look at your income statement, it's the amount of money that you've earned or the expenses that you paid. But there are certain things that are static. They do not change over time. There's something that's just as long as you're reporting, that is the case. Now, a name may change over time, but for example, the country that you have been incorporated in, that will not change. That's a forever. It's going to be a different entity that reports if you're going to be incorporating under a different country. So the purpose of forever are for static facts that are not just at a point in time or for a period of time. They are for that reporting entity, something that is static will not change.
So there is an application of this, but it's not used very often. Most of the things are instant duration. And then context can also contain this dimensional classification. So as we said, XBRL 2.1 was extended with dimensions, and this additional syntax must have been incorporated somewhere. And where it ended up was in the segment or scenario containers in the instance document. Right here, you don't see the dimensional syntax. It's just the XML syntax. In the next slide, you'll see the dimensional syntax as well. So here's another example of different units. So units can be simple, just have a measure, or they can be complex. For example, we have here the square meters, or we have earnings per share, which is we have a numerator and denominator. So depending on what is being reported, what is the character of the data, you have different definition of the unit. And one thing that you can also have in the instance document is a footnote. I mean, I don't think it's going to be used in the EBA scenario, but it's very useful for the exchange of information. It's going to be?
We use it, yes.
Okay, so maybe you can introduce the footnote then.
Okay. So the footnote is a way to introduce comments to a fact which is in an instance. For example, if the fact is much bigger than the fact on the previous year, there may be a way to introduce a comment stating the reason for this change. And like any labels used in XML and XBRL, every piece of text has an attribute which is called XML lang, which states the language. So in this case, the footnote, there are two footnotes. It's like the same one in English and one in French. So it's very convenient, and we use it in XCP, for example. Okay. The footnote is not in the taxonomy. Okay, it's a use maybe in a document called a filing manual, which says the way to use taxonomy and the way to construct instances. And some supervisors may accept footnote because it's very convenient to. It may be used to avoid a phone call, some explanation.
Okay, so you can see that this is another feature of XBRL that can be used to provide additional information about reported facts, not only the value, but maybe some description why the value is different comparing to different year. And it uses Xlink and extended links and all the things that you already know from the link basis.
Normally associated with, you see a fact, you see a little 1 or a star, and then on the bottom of the page or the back of the report, there's
an Excel command or HTML pop-up or whatever.
Then the relation between because we are running out of time, just very shortly. XBRL reports in the schema. Obviously, every report must indicate what schema it's based on, because we have, for example, different reports based on different frameworks. We have different frequency of reporting, requires different scope of data. All that goes in the schema rep, which tells you what is the files, the taxonomy files that are referenced by this particular instance document. And then, as we showed you, you have elements that are created according to the name that is defined in the schema, and then contain the context reference, unit reference, precision, and the value. Obviously, you can by going through the report to the schema, you can reach to the labels. So this is the way how you can actually access the human readable description of all the elements, especially that you can see here French labels for elements which have which IDs are defined basically in English. The same with references. The presentation link also is discoverable through the instance document schema. You can see the hierarchies represented in the instance document. Is a flat list, the same as schema. I mean, it has to be because it's the XML constraint. But then you can reference all the necessary semantical information from the taxonomy. The same for calculation link base. And this is the example of dimensional context. So you can see that the all regions for geographical areas and all for operating segments, this is how you annotate the dimensional information in XBRL. So a fact revenues referring to this particular context is reported for this particular combination. So for every combination, you'll have a separate context, which is also code consuming. And this is right now being considered something that is a problem in terms of performance of XBRL, but we are trying to somehow cope with that. And last but not least, the inline XBRL, just to introduce it at the end. So what it does in general, if you want to exchange the information and you want to see what it is, apart from just having the code, obviously at the beginning you have XBRL taxonomy, and both systems of the reporting entity and supervisor understand this taxonomy. And then, based on the taxonomy and some mappings, you can generate the instance documents, so the data that is applicable for the filer. But before you send it to the supervisor, you use some transformation, or maybe do it manually, different way, and convert it in XHTML, which has inline XBRL tags inside. Which means that what you exchange is a file that you can open and view in a browser, but inside it's information that can be extracted to and from the systems. So where a supervisor actually receives it, they extract it again to instance, store it, do the validation and analysis in the BI systems on the supervisor side. But then discussion between the filer and the supervisor is on HTML, not the XBRL, which is much easier to communicate between the users. And there are some use cases indicated. Here's an example, again, Intel financial statement. Let's pick a number. This is, as you can see, the inline XBRL inside of HTML. So you have a HTML tag, TD, some class, some information about the formatting. And then what we have inside is the inline XBRL tag, IX, you can see the prefix over here, and it refers to the IFRS element revenue. It contains the value, the number, but then this number contains a comma, so it has to be formatted properly. That's why you have the format non-comma dot. Also, this information, as you can see on the website, is in millions. That's why you have scale. And having this information in the HTML file, you are able to automatically convert it and produce a valid line of XBRL instance document. That's in general how it works. So just a few words at the end. XBRL is not off the shelf. You don't go to the shop and buy XBRL and install it and it works. It's a little bit more complex. It's a solution that can work, but it has to be customized. So it's very flexible and it supports many different reporting scenarios. But it's, and I think it's a Charlie Hoffman quote, maybe someone else from the XBRL that has heard a long time ago, that it's a double-edged sword. So you can solve a problem, like you cut the Gordian knot, or you can hurt yourself and others. So be careful, and you have to know how to use it. Just don't just use it. Try to figure out how others are using it, and learn as much as possible before you start. And as I said, it reports different scenarios of reporting. So we have prudential reporting, like in here, EBA and EIOPA. We have financial statements which are flexible, like IFRS, US GAAP. Every company statement is different. And we have the SVR projects, which is the ultimate goal of XBRL, well, where you send just one filing to one institution, and all the institutions take from this filing what they need. That's the ultimate aim of XBRL. So we have different requirements, different taxonomy architectures. And during this workshop, we'll be discussing in particular the architecture of the current FinWeb. It's going to be at 1:30 in the other room. But before that, Oliver Servan will present the architecture and in general the application of the IFRS taxonomy. So you're invited to the other room and to listen about these two taxonomies in particular. Thank you very much and enjoy your lunch. Do we have time for questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you show how validation of preparation tag look like into the XBRL?
Yeah, but it's not on my laptop. Maybe I can show you later.
But is there any operator language into the XBRL?
XBRL in general uses XPath. I mean, the formulas, maybe Eric, you're using more the formulas.
Formula use the XPath, and you can use any arithmetic or algebraic operator between variables. You define variables and filter that allow to define variables. You may, for example, apply the same formula A equals B plus C,
I have
with A being replaced by a lot of variables and B another list of variables, so it's very flexible. The calculation, the way to build up calculation base is to put the weight on each arc. Okay, so we have A equals B minus C, so we will have a weight of 1 instead in front of B. A equals B minus C, we will have a weight of minus 1 in front of C. So it's very limited. So it's a very the first step to perform validation, numeric validation. But formula is much more powerful. Complex.
Yes?
Yeah. Thank you for the quality presentation. I come from the business side supervision, so I'm not. I was really glad to see what X-ray you do with our financial statements, very flat. What I'm interested in is because of the validation is very important for the supervisors. If you could go back to the slide 34, I was just wondering whether XBRL 34 does this ma petite entreprise or whatever, do they submit the sums, meaning 500,000, or it could be excluded and work out with the formulas
It's up to you,
within the XBRL?
totally up to taxonomy alpha. It
But
could be both ways.
XBRL supports the possibility that we could do the
Both.
sum up.
Yeah.
So they don't have to
No.
submit the sum?
No.
Because we just don't like them
Technically,
to
they don't
sum
have to.
up.
You can produce them.
Yes, but typically in the
Yeah, the common
supervisory
practice.
reporting, the business people want to have the sums.
No, we don't.
Oh.
We like to have the
Detailed
analytical
data,
item, and then we sum it up as we like.
So the business people I met want to have the sum because they may be computed in different ways.
Well,
Okay.
we both know how to make a computation, and we
Okay, so
it's
we have-
basic mathematics plus minus. It's very easy. So we can do it.
Yes. Also, in
Absolutely.
the tax reporting scenario, they don't require all these things are computed.
Yeah, that's
No,
right.
yeah. That's
Some environments say, just give me the facts, I'm going to do what I want, I'm going to do my own tests. Some people say, give me whatever you are reporting on paper. In HMRC, they can say, you can report whatever you want, but only tag the things that we absolutely need. So it is implementation specific. You ask what you want. Demand what you want, mandate what you want, make optional, and leave it out there.
It's taxonomy specific. So
Taxonomy and implementation.
Okay, because one item could really end up in different kinds of tables, understand? So we don't want to validate it and say, the same thing should appear in table 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,
That
it
would-
should be the same thing.
That wouldn't be the case in XBRL because you would define only once this thing.
Yes, that's what I
So-
wanted to say. I wanted to ask. Thank you.
But getting rid of all those totals from paper is one of the ways that, for example, in the Dutch standard business reporting environment, they moved from 100,000 data points to 8,000 data points. Because you didn't take net income, which you report bottom of this page, top of that page again, here in these 17 different places. You don't have to report those anymore. Just give us the facts.
Okay, so enjoy your lunch.
Thank you, guys.
You know what is the canteen? It's in the first floor. Okay, it's very easy to. If you want, come with me, please.
So it's lunch in the first floor in the canteen. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you. You're welcome. No, I think the files you have, I don't know, they're going to put them up on the website.
Yeah.
You have our permission to send that email.
More